Hello.
Thank you for joining us on a special podcast of the Ed Morrissey Show. Joining me right now, Governor Mitt Romney on the campaign trail. Welcome to the podcast, sir, and thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you, Ed. Good to be back with you.
And my understanding is you're in Florida, or you're leaving Florida right now.
Yes, I this morning was at a rally in St. Petersburg, and I just had a fundraising event in Tampa, and right now we're headed to the Miami area. So we're going across Florida, visiting friends, and hopefully building a campaign war chest that will take us to the victory in November.
And I'm sure that the issue that keeps coming up again and again while you're talking to all these fine folks in Florida is the bumper sticker distractions that the Obama campaign keeps throwing out at you. I can't even keep track anymore, Governor Romney. What's the distraction du jour from the Obama campaign?
Well, the most recent attacks are really off target, and I think they know that. They said, "Oh gosh, Governor Romney at Bain Capital closed down a steel factory." But their problem, of course, is that the steel factory closed down 2 years after I left Bain Capital. I was no longer there, so that's hardly something which is on my watch. And of course, they also don't mention a couple of other things. One is that we were able to help create over 100,000 jobs, and secondly, on the president's watch, about 100,000 jobs were lost in the auto industry and auto dealers and auto manufacturers. So, he's hardly one to point a finger. Oh, and by the way, he has no problem going out and doing fundraisers with Bain Capital and private equity people.
A Blackstone group, right? I mean, he was the same day that they sent that they released the attack ad on Bain, which I think you guys countered pretty effectively. He was doing a fundraiser with Tony James at the Blackstone Group, and the Blackstone Group is a private equity firm, much the same as Bain Capital. Am I right?
Yes, as a matter of fact, we have made investments together over our history. I have respect for them and for much of the work that they do. And I think the president is just misguided in his effort to try and divide Americans from one another, to try and disparage one part of our economy from another, or one person from another. That's really not what America is. If there are bad actors, why that needs to be pointed out. But that's certainly not the case for a whole industry.
Well, I mean, speaking of which, this topic came up this week as well. Actually last week, J.P. Morgan announced that it had taken a $2 billion loss in one of its funds. Jamie Dimon, of course, is the CEO of J.P. Morgan. Also, at one point at least, had been a fairly significant contributor to Obama and the Democrats. This is the type of thing that happens. I mean, you hear a lot of people say, well, somebody should be arrested, this sort of thing. J.P. Morgan, when you are investing, you take risks, and that's part of what, you know that, because that was your job for a very long time. How troubling is the J.P. Morgan thing, and is this something that is that should be looked at a little bit more closely?
Well, there's always opportunity to learn from experience, and a large loss, a trading loss of this nature, is something from which J.P. Morgan should learn, and I think as well regulators should look at it just to understand what happened, why it happened. But let's note here, as you point out, this was not a loss to the taxpayers of America.
Right.
This was a loss to shareholders and owners of J.P. Morgan, and that's the way America works. Some people experience a loss in this case because of a bad decision. By the way, there was someone who made a gain. All right, the $2 billion J.P. Morgan lost, someone else gained, and so we of course have regulation. We need regulation. We need to make sure that the taxpayers are not stuck with the bill. But in the case of this J.P. Morgan mistake and loss, it's not something that's borne by the taxpayers in any way, shape, or form.
You mentioned, of course, that there wasn't taxpayer dollars lost on this. One of the issues, though, is that J.P. Morgan is one of the so-called too big to fail institutions. It's one of the ones that would at least arguably need to be backstopped in case of a massive failure. That's not what happened here. It's not so bad that J.P. Morgan is at risk, apparently. But what do you plan to do? What are your proposals to deal with the too big to fail syndrome? Because so far, nothing that's gone on in the last 3 years has really addressed that issue. The too big to fail institutions have gotten bigger over the last 3 years.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. The Dodd-Frank bill, which was supposedly designed to protect us from too big to fail, did just the opposite. They made it harder for the small banks to succeed, and the larger money center banks have grown during these last 3 years. So the Dodd-Frank did not work in that purpose. And my own view is that if a large bank gets in difficulty, why it can fail. There's no reason why the shareholders or bondholders of a bank can't lose their funds if a bank were to get in trouble. What happened in 2008 was different than that. It was that mortgages that were held by virtually all of the banks were now in real trouble. And there was the prospect of not just one or two banks failing, but of all the major banks failing, and a complete collapse of our economic or our currency system. So this is a very different matter, and one I'm sure we can learn from, but I would not rush to pass new legislation or new regulation. This is, in the normal course of business, a large loss, but certainly not one which is crippling or threatening to the institution.
Let's talk about taxpayer dollars, because I know that's the theme that you're focusing on this particular week, is spending and debt, and how that is burdening the American economy, why we're not breaking out of this stagnation cycle that we're continuing to exist in. What about spending and debt do you think that needs changing right away? The top things that you would do once you got into office?
Well, there are a couple things, Ed. First, we have to eliminate some programs. And eliminating those programs will save some money right away, but it will also save a lot of money down the road when those programs grow larger and larger. And, of course, the first one on my list has to be Obamacare. We simply cannot afford a new multi-trillion-dollar entitlement. It's the wrong way to go, and I would repeal it on day one. There are other programs which are not essential, which should be repealed and not effective and should be eliminated. Then there are a lot of things the government does at the federal level which can be done more efficiently and with better responsiveness to the needs of our citizens if they were done by the states or even by private enterprises. So I look to take Medicaid, for instance, and return that to the states so the states can care for their own people in the way that they feel best to meet the needs of their own citizens.
And that's the type of devolution that would eventually, we're talking about this with the Paul Ryan budget, which is has been fairly controversial, the whole idea of subsidiarity, and this is getting into a whole religious thing that we don't necessarily need to delve into, but the concept is pretty concrete, is that the closer you get to the problem, the more efficient you can address it. So rather than having everything coming from Washington, D.C., it makes more sense to have it being done by the state capitals or even by local government when possible.
Yeah, I happen to be a big believer in the power of competition. And one of the reasons why the private sector is so much more productive and lower cost and with better products than government is that in the private sector you have hundreds of businesses and thousands of entrepreneurs all working very hard to find new, better ways of doing things. In government, at the state level, you have 50 states competing, and so they're each finding improvements, learning from one another. But at the federal level, they don't see anyone as competing with them.
Right.
And there's no need on their part to try and improve or to find lower cost ways of doing things or to find better ways to meet the needs of their citizens. So the federal government is, frankly, the worst place to do almost anything except where it's required because no one else can do it, such as, for instance, maintaining a military or maintaining an intelligence network. These things have to be done at the federal level.
Talking about deficits and borrowing, there's some very disturbing news coming out of Europe over the last week or two, and I'd be interested in getting your take on just how dire it's starting to look over there. You're somebody who is an expert in these sort of macroeconomic trends. You're looking at Greece. It looks like there's a bank run building in Greece. They may pull out of the euro. How important is it for America to shore up its own financial structure at this point in time, given what's going on in Europe, and how bleak do you think it looks in Europe right now?
Well, I'm very concerned about Europe, and Greece is going to make a decision as to whether or not they remain in the Europe and adopt measures which frankly raise the taxes that their laws suggest they should already be raising, or not. And this is the great challenge that they're going to face. And hopefully, Europe will be resolved in a way that does not roil the capital markets of the world and cause pain there and elsewhere. But it is a good reminder to us that even though things seem okay, at some point there can be a sudden shift which causes interest rates to skyrocket, which causes investors to lose their confidence in a country. And the fact that we keep borrowing every year massively more than we take in is a very dangerous habit, and which could lead us to a European-style financial crisis, and that puts people out of work. It's devastating. What's happening in Europe in some of these nations is a frightening and alarming thing, and we must pull back from this kind of precipice ourselves by putting America on track to having a balanced budget, which is exactly what I will do.
Now, you're in Florida today. I understand that you're endorsing Connie Mack for the Republican nomination to run against Bill Nelson for the U.S. Senate.
Yes, I think I've probably endorsed Connie Mack over the past year or two, time and time again, as we've been out speaking together. But I think you're the first one to ask me officially, but the answer is yes. Of course, I officially endorse Connie Mack. He is a fiscal conservative. He is a solid leader in our party, and I have the utmost respect for Connie Mack and wish him the very best in his campaign to unseat a Democrat who needs to go home.
That would be, of course, Bill Nelson. And how important is it to win the Senate? Obviously, it's very important for us to win the White House. We're already in control of the House, but as President Romney, how important will it be for you to have a Republican in charge of the U.S. Senate?
Well, I have to tell you, Ed, I want to get America on track again. And I've talked about cutting spending. I want to also take the action that will make America a very attractive place for small business, for big businesses that want to expand, for foreign investment. I want jobs to come back to America. And for that to happen, it would obviously be very helpful if Washington were able to work together as opposed to being in these partisan pitched battles where nothing seems to get done. And so having a majority in the Senate would be a real plus. Clearly, you can't do something that runs over the opposition party because we're not likely to have 60 seats. We will not have a supermajority. But if we get a majority, that would make it more likely that we're able to take the kind of fundamental and dramatic change in Washington that I think the people of this country are looking for.
Governor Romney, one last question before we let you go, because I know you're a very busy man, but talking about endorsements, word is that Herman Cain is going to come out and endorse you today. Have you spoken with Mr. Cain recently about that?
We spoke together a couple of weeks ago, and I have no announcement to make. I'll let him make whatever announcement he'd like to make, but he obviously has a strong following, and his support and that of a lot of other Republicans has been one of the most encouraging aspects of these last few weeks, which is people coming together in our party to say, you know what, we have some differences among us, but one thing we all agree on is the need to take America in a different direction than that being taken by Barack Obama. And so I sure hope to get his endorsement and that of a lot of other top Republicans.
Governor Romney, thank you very much for your time today.
Thanks, Ed. Good to be with you today.